The first thing we need to do is look at our equations. Our first equation is going to be Ke equals mass times velocity squared divided by 2. Our second equation is going to be GPE equals mass times gravity times height. So this is gravitational potential energy, and this one is kinetic energy. How do we know which formula to use on a question? You look at what's given in the question. In this question, it gives the speed or the velocity of 30 meters a second. And therefore, we're going to use this equation because it has velocity as part of the equation. We wouldn't use this one because velocity is not part of this equation. What is the mass of an object that creates 30,000 joules of energy by traveling at 30 meters per second? We were trying to find the mass, and we have the speed. Therefore, we're going to use kinetic energy. Ke equals mass times velocity squared divided by 2. Our kinetic energy is 30,000 joules. We're trying to solve for the mass. We're going to multiply that by the velocity, which is 30, squared, and divide by 2. So let's go back to our question. What is the mass? So we're trying to solve for m, and so we have 30,000 joules. So we write down 30,000. Next, that's going to equal our mass times our velocity. Our velocity is 30, and we're going to put 30 squared and divide by 2. In our next step, we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 2 because 2 is on the bottom. When we do that, this becomes 60,000 equals m times 30 squared. Our next step is to divide both sides by 30 squared. When we do that, we get 66.6, and it goes on and on. M is our mass in kilograms. So our next question is, what is the velocity of a 500 kilogram elevator that has 6,000 joules of energy? In this one, we're trying to solve for velocity. We're going to use the equation Ke equals mv squared divided by 2. So in this equation, we have 6,000 joules. That 6,000 joules equals our mass, which is 500 kilograms, multiplied by our velocity squared divided by 2. The first step is to multiply both sides by 2. When we do that, we get 12,000 on this side equals 500 times v squared. Our next step is to divide both sides by 500. When we do that, we get 24 on this side equals v squared. The next step is to unsquare the v. We unsquare both sides, we get 4.9 equals v. Velocity is measured in meters squared, therefore our 4.9 is going to be 4.9 meters per second. And this is our answer. This time, what is the kinetic energy of a 4,000 kilogram boat moving at 5 meters per second? Here, it tells us we're looking for kinetic energy. And so we know our equation then is going to be mv squared divided by 2. A 4,000 kilogram boat is moving at 5 meters per second. And this time, we're just going to do straight arithmetic. And when we do the arithmetic, we get 50,000. And because it's kinetic energy, we know it's going to be joules. In this equation, a 1.5 kilogram ball is thrown into the air with an initial velocity of 30 meters per second. How high into the air did the ball travel? In this equation, we're trying to solve for height. And so the formula with height is GPE equals mgh, where h is height. To solve for height, we're going to need the mass. In this case, the mass is 1.5 kilograms. We're going to need gravity, and gravity is 9.8 meters per second square. And that will give us height if we have the kinetic energy. We don't have the kinetic energy, but we have a way to get the kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is mass times velocity squared divided by 2. We need the mass, which is 1.5. We need the velocity, which is 30. When we do the arithmetic on this particular problem, we get 675 joules. This is not the answer to the problem. This is simply our kinetic energy, 675. So now that we have our 675, we can plug it into our equation and solve for h. First step, we simplify. 675 equals, when you multiply these two numbers together, you get 14.7. And we're going to multiply that by h. To solve the equation, we divide 14.7 by both sides. When we do that, we get 45.9 on this side and h by itself on the other side. H is the height in meters, 45.9 meters. And this is the answer to problem number 4. Our last problem is problem number 5. This is the longest problem. You are on rollerblades on top of a large hill. Your potential energy is equal to 6,000 joules. The last time you checked, your mass was 60 kilograms. If you start skating down this hill, your potential energy will be converted into kinetic energy. At the bottom of the hill, your kinetic energy will be equal to your potential energy at the top. What will be your speed at the bottom of the hill? In this equation, they're asking you for speed. The equation that has speed in it is KE equals mv squared divided by 2. To use this equation, you have to know the joules, which in this case is 6,000. So to solve this equation, the first thing we do is multiply both sides by 2. When we do that, we get 12,000 on this side equals 60 times v squared. Next, we're going to divide both sides by 60. When we do that, we get 200 equals v squared. The next step is to use the square root to solve for v. The square root of 200 is 14.1. And that equals v. V is meters per second. Therefore, our answer is going to be 14.1 meters per second.